we remember that Peter is writing to Christians who are on the verge of being very harshly persecuted under the Nero persecution. And things had already started, but they were going to be amped up quite a bit. And Peter is preparing them for that and how they ought to deal with these things. And there's a lot in the Bible, in the New Testament in particular, about this subject, about how not everybody's going to like you, and some people are going to mistreat you because of your faith, and you have to be strong anyway. And it gives us all sorts of reasons to be strong and what we need in order to endure through these things. And that's what Peter is doing here at the beginning of chapter 2. He is assuring them of their exalted position in the eyes of God, just how important the church is to him. And as the church is important to him, of course, each individual Christian is. And so if we look at verse 4, to whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God, and precious. Ye also, as lively stones, are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ. How that the church here is the temple, and it's built on the chief cornerstone of Christ, and how he was disallowed indeed of men. Men didn't want Christ, and so they in essence threw him away, but he was the precious cornerstone that God was going to build his temple upon. And we also, it says, as lively stones are built up, a spiritual house. And we ended last week by looking at sort of the parallels that are made here of how we are the temple. We're also the priesthood. It says we're built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood. Of course, priests offer up sacrifices to God, and we are also the sacrifice. Romans 12:1, that we present our bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God. We have this great exalted position in the eyes of God and given great importance. And so even through persecution, we don't lose that we are still precious in the eyes of God, though we are tried in the fire of persecution. This is a quote of Isaiah 28 and verse 16. And this tells us about the exalted position of Christ, that he is indeed the chief cornerstone on which everything else is built. And we talked about last week how the cornerstone was the most important stone. It's where everything began. When they were going to build a building, they would set the cornerstone. They would make sure that they set it just right, because everything else was going to be lined up off of that chief cornerstone. It had to be a strong stone, one that was just right to fit on the corner. And so it had an exalted position within any building. Well, Christ is the chief cornerstone that has been set in Zion. He is elect, chosen, and precious. And because of that, he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. They're not going to be confused. They're not going to be dismayed. He that believeth on Christ is going to make it through any sort of difficulty that they're going to face. And remember that all this book is centered around that idea that persecution is coming and difficult times are coming. And how are you going to make it through those things? Well, we believe in the chief cornerstone that gives us strength, a strong foundation on which to stand and to live. So to those who believe, again, he's speaking here to the church, those who believe he is precious. We see him as the preeminent one, the chief cornerstone on which everything else is built. But not everybody views Christ this way. And because of that comes the conflict and persecution that we have to face. Unto them which be disobedient, this stone which the builders disallowed or rejected, the same is made the head of the corner. His rejection by men did not make any difference as to what his importance was and what his mission was, and neither can it with us. And so this stone which was disallowed by men is still chosen of God, and still the head of the corner of the church. But to those who are disobedient, he is a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumbled at the word. They stumbled at who Christ came to be. We saw this among the Jews especially. And this is a quote back to Isaiah 8 and verse 14. But we see it in the Jews, how that he wasn't what they expected the Christ to be. He wasn't this great military ruler who is going to throw off the bondage of Rome and make Israel the preeminent world power. That's what they wanted, but that's not what Christ was. It's never meant to be what he was. And so they stumbled at his teaching, they stumbled on his purpose, and became disobedient. Whereunto also they were appointed. This doesn't have the idea that God made them this way, but Christ was going to be rejected. That was part of the prophecies of Christ, that he would be rejected, that he would be crucified, that he would be mistreated. And so they fulfilled that appointment because of their own unwillingness to hear the message of Christ and obey him and believe in him. And so to us, he is precious. We understand just how glorious Christ is in the church that he has made, but not everybody views it that way. And we live in a world of people who don't see the greatness of Christ. Yes, out in the world there are those who are disobedient, who stumble at Christ, but not the church. And as God the Father has glorified his Son Christ, he also glorifies the church. It says, but ye are a chosen generation. Chosen generation. That they are the elect of God. That this is the people of God that God wants and God has chosen and God had prepared and planned for throughout time and now has brought to fruition through Christ. You are a chosen generation. And then it describes them and us as the church as well, a royal priesthood, king and priest. Let's turn to Revelation chapter 1, 5 and 6. And from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness and the first begotten of the dead, and the prince of the kings of the earth, unto him that loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood, and hath made us kings and priests unto God and his Father, to him be glory and dominion forever and ever. Christ has made us within the church kings and priests. Over in Revelation 5 and verse 10, we have a similar idea. Starting in verse 9, and they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book and to open the seals thereof, for thou wast slain, and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood out of every kindred, and tongue, and people, and nation, and hast made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. We haven't been made kings and priests necessarily in the eyes of people, but in the eyes of God, that's what we were. Just as Christ was not the chief cornerstone in the eyes of people, they didn't see him as precious as he was and is. But God did. God chose him. And we see how precious he is. And in the church, we ought to see that about ourselves as well. The importance that God has placed on us, even in the midst of worldly persecution and trials. Still the chosen generation, you are a royal priesthood and holy nation. Holy nation. A nation that's been set apart for God's use and that belongs to him. We live in a great nation, America, United States, but it's not a Christian nation. There's one. There's only one nation that belongs to God as his people, and that is the church. And we need to remember that. You know, it's one thing to have patriotic pride and all that, and that's good. I have it as well. But some people get it twisted that, you know, the church is reliant on America, and it's not. We are members of the greatest nation in the world, the church that belongs to Christ. It is the holy nation. And it shouldn't surprise us when we see evil around us, even in the type of society which we live in. Of course, we are grateful to live in a type of place where we do, where we have the freedoms to worship and we have the freedoms to preach and to evangelize, and we have the freedom of speech, freedom to assemble. All these things are great. The church is not reliant on those things, though. We're grateful for them because it has lowered the level of persecution that we face. Might also soften us up too much as well. There's always a flip side to the good times that we have and the conveniences that we have. But this is the holy nation that we belong to. The church. It's what's most important. It's what has to be our priority. So we are a holy nation and a peculiar people. We're strange. That's not what that means. It doesn't mean that we're strange. In a way, I guess it does, but it means a people for God's own possession. In Titus 2 in verse 14, it says, who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from all iniquity and purify unto himself a peculiar people, zealous of good works. He gave himself to redeem us. He has bought us. That's why we belong to him. It's because he has bought us out of the world and made us, purified us to be his special people. And as such, we ought to be zealous of good works. And we have that same thought here in our verse, 1 Peter 2 and verse 9, which we'll show in just a moment. But we are a people for his own possession. Why are we these things? What is our purpose as being the chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people? To show forth the praises of him who hath called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Remember Matthew 5 and verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. This is the purpose of our being the people of God, is to show forth his praises. And this thought is repeated so many times throughout this next section of the book. It's sort of the, overruling point that he's making, that sort of the thesis of all of it, is that through our lives, the immoral, heathen world around us can see the light of God, can see his greatness because of the way we endure through persecutions and the way we behave ourselves as a holy nation and a peculiar people. That is our purpose, and sometimes we forget that purpose. And we do not shine that light as brightly as we ought to. And it goes, of course, this is a quote of, excuse me, this is a quote of Hosea 1, 9 and 10, to an idea back in the Old Testament. Remember, Hosea was told to marry a wife of whoredoms, and then she had children that weren't from him, and so they were named, not my people was the name of one of them. And this was sort of the explanation of that, not my people, but they're going to be. And so it was pointing toward a time when Gentiles would be saved, which in time past, under the Old Testament, God had his people Israel, and everybody else weren't his people. All right, so the peculiar people of God, the people who God possessed, who God owned, were the Israelites. And now it's different. It's not Jews, but it is Christians, which includes Gentiles, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. So we are a people who belong to God, who has received his mercy. And no amount of persecution or trial in this life changes that, unless we become unfaithful. We can remove ourselves from the people of God and his possession, but the world can't do that. Satan can't do that. We have the mercy of God as his people, no matter what's going on. All right, this next section is built on these facts, that we are the people of God, and we live amongst people who are not. And how can we live in a society that is immoral, who doesn't see the world the way we do, and perhaps even persecutes us as a result of it. How are we supposed to live? And so verse 11 and 12 give us sort of the thesis that's going to run through halfway through chapter 3. We are a holy nation, but you can't point to us on the map because we cover the globe. We are strangers and pilgrims. Again, this idea used many times by Peter, that this world is not our home, that we have no permanent place here. Our citizenship is in heaven, and we're just passing through this land to get to there. So as strangers and pilgrims, you have to understand that this world does not have much to offer you like heaven does. Abstain from fleshly lust, which war against the soul. What do you want to have healthy? Your soul or your body? What do you want to feel good? Your soul or your body? So abstain from fleshly lust, because they're going to keep you from your home. You're strangers and pilgrims here. Those things are not what you're after. That's not your goal or your mission, but rather to get to heaven. And so, verse 12, have your conversation honest among the Gentiles. Honest means honorable. Be a person of integrity and honor. We can only do that through being moral and abstaining from fleshly lusts. But he says to have this among the Gentiles, among those who are immoral, who are against Christ, and who is against his church. And they had to live in these areas. Remember, he's writing to people in modern-day Turkey, of Asia Minor, who were pagan and who followed all types of immorality as a part of that. And so they're living in a society that views the world completely different than what they do. And so this was a hard place for them to live. In many ways, we live in a very easy place to live a Christian life. You think about it, we're in Warren County, where there are 50 congregations of the Lord's people. When we go to Walmart, we are around our brethren in the faith, and we're also around people who are not New Testament Christians, but who are decent people, who have a mind about wanting to serve Christ and things like that. And those are sort of in the majority. What a blessed place we live in. But imagine being a Christian today in a place like Las Vegas or San Francisco, or across the world, where there are even less influences of Christianity. How are you supposed to live in that type of environment? Well, have your conversation honest. Be an honorable person, so that even though they speak against you as an evildoer, they are opposed to you, and what you do in their eyes is just wrong. And there are people like that we live around, who think the Christian lifestyle is what's crazy, is what's wrong, and yet they can't deny the good works. And so be honest, honorable, so that even though they want to speak against you as an evildoer, they can see your good works, and that causes them to glorify God in the day of visitation.